Welcome to the Keep Yours podcast, where we'll help you decode the complex financial system so you can better understand how to thrive within it. This is where you'll learn strategies and life hacks to stay out of debt, claim your financial power, and keep what's yours. Here's your host, David Bradshaw.
Citizens of the world, welcome to the first student loan podcast from Keep Yours. So part of the purpose of Keep Yours is to help everyone understand our system better, understand the rules of the system better, understand debt better. And the first project, besides some basic education on finance that we're going to put out there and we're going to get into, is student loan debt. Obviously a major problem in the country and the world right now. And when I look at what's happening out there right now with student loan debt, here's all I see. We're dealing with the wounded. Everyone's programs, everyone's discussions are, if you have student loan debt, here's the things to do about it. But as we see in medicine and most other things in this country, no one's really discussing in detail a lot about prevention, a lot about the necessity of this. And that's for multiple reasons when I look at this whole pile of what student loan debt entails. Because we all right now believe that all of these kids are going to go to college, that every single child should go to college. 94% of parents, according to Pew Research, believe that their child is going to go to college. Now, we know that 94% of students don't go to college, number one. Two, we know that 94% of students are not going to graduate from college because it's just not attainable for everybody in terms of intellectual capacity for some and financial resources for others. However, for those that want to pursue an education, for those that want to improve their life, student loan debt is one of the things that's going to prevent any of the benefits from education transferring to you individually. And I see that as a huge problem. Not only that, but this student loan debt crisis, the amount of student loan debt out there, is a danger to us from an economic perspective and from a system of government perspective. Full on 44% of millennials now believe that socialism would be a better form of government than capitalism. I would encourage everyone out there who believes that socialism is a good idea to go find the country where socialism is working well, where citizens are happy, where all of the needs of society are met, and please report that back. Because the last that I checked, there is not a country on the planet that has ever instituted a socialism system that's worked. Our latest example of socialism gone awry is Venezuela, where if you happen to be a citizen of Venezuela, you're either A, trying to flee to go somewhere where you hope you can even find food, or B, you're working for the government in some capacity, or C, you're starving. And they literally call it the turismo diet, where people do not have food, where you can't run a business. Everything is owned by the government, and therefore everything controlled by the government, and therefore nothing's getting done, and the system is falling apart. The belief in socialism is that everyone will contribute equally, but that's never what happens. What always happens is people figure out the least amount they can do to get by, and they do that amount, and that's where you're left with as a society. However, when students are drowning in student loan debt and their future prospects are much worse, they're not seeing that as a negative. And there's many reasons for these issues right now. The government has certainly done students absolutely no favor. They certainly set up the system to be against students from a simple perspective of its non-dischargeable debt and bankruptcy. So the government has, on the one hand, skewed the entire system AKA, if this was true capitalism, if there was really a free market, then the debts would be discharged in bankruptcy. Not only that, but the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, came out and said he believes that student loan debts should be dischargeable in bankruptcy. So you're talking about the guy who's in charge of making sure that there is money in U.S. currency for the world and setting policy for the world, because the dollar is the world's reserve currency. You're talking about this man believes that they should be dischargeable in bankruptcy, but they're not. And we're going to talk about what that means and what that means to the bank. Not only are they not dischargeable in bankruptcy, but we're also not going to provide and require that people get a real financial education before they go take out large amounts of student loan debt. Which is very crazy when you consider it from this perspective. You're 17, you're in high school, you're not allowed to sign a contract. You can't have a credit card with a bank. You turn 18, all of a sudden you can get a credit card with a bank. Now in 4 different states you're not allowed to buy tobacco, and in no state can you buy alcohol, but you can sign up to be in the military and take a bullet for your country and die before you turn 21 and can legally do those things. And you can take out tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars of student loan debt. How does this make sense? No real financial education required to sign up to make yourself an indentured servant for life. So if you believe that this system is set up against you, you're absolutely correct. However, in general, capitalism is not set up for you. It is for your financial liberty, but is not set up to protect you as the individual. A term that everybody should know, from Latin of caveat emptor, which means buyer beware, always. And no matter what you want to buy in the world, somebody is willing to sell that to you. And somebody's also willing to charge you a higher price almost every single time than what you need to pay. And student loan debt is no different in this. College education is no different in this. And this is what really needs to be addressed. In a free market, you're able to decide. You're not required to go to a specific university. You're not required to take out a certain amount of student loan debt. That's your choice. But in making those decisions, you should be helped along by some people who have your best interest in mind versus their own, especially when the system is set up so you cannot discharge this debt in bankruptcy. That would make logical sense. But this is where the government has failed you. And I'm going to give you a very simple, easy example right here. So according to the Pew Research Center, the average lifetime benefit of college is supposed to be $550,000. Now here's the catch right out of the gates with this. That assumes college costs you $6,000 out of pocket. Well, we know that it doesn't cost you $6,000 out of pocket. So let's take a little bit deeper dive into this real monetary value on the averages. So if your average benefit is $550,000 of additional wages over your 40-year lifetime of working. But wait, what comes out of that $550,000 first? Taxes to Uncle Sam. And if you make more money, you're going to pay more in taxes. And you're not just going to pay one kind of tax that you're thinking about, income tax. You're going to pay income tax to the federal government. You're going to pay income tax to your state government, unless you live in one of the states that doesn't charge any. But you're also going to pay Social Security and Medicare tax. Long term, you're also going to pay sales tax and property taxes. All sorts of other taxes that they've added on. So, assuming 30% you're going to pay in taxes. Now, if you have to pay tuition, fees, room, and board for your college education, which current sticker price here in Colorado is roughly $125,000 to go to CU or to go to the University of Colorado or Colorado State University in Fort Collins. So now if you have to pay that $120,000, that's taking off of your lifetime benefit. And then if you had to take out student loans for that and or pay it out with your family's money that you could have otherwise invested and made money off of, you have that cost as well. So if I take off the 30% in taxes, if I take off the $120,000 for tuition, fees, and room and board, and assuming that you had to borrow all of that, there's another $120,000 of interest to repay those loans. That means the net benefit to you from that college degree, if you take what they're selling, sticker price, is $145,000 over 40 years. That's an average yearly increase in benefit of $3,600. Now, is that worth the 4 years of going to school? Is that worth carrying that debt for 20 years? I would tell you that it's probably not. That $3,600 of increased cash in your pocket is not worth the stress that it will put on you over those 40 years. That's what I'm going to tell you. Now, if you can get it a lot cheaper than that, then the value goes up. But at that rate, we've basically taken all of the value out. When I read about $200,000 of student loan debt, well, that means $200,000 went to tuition, and $200,000 is going to be required to pay it back. Well, now you're at even. There's literally zero benefit to you from going to college had you not gone, but you deal with the stress of owing and paying and owing for your entire life because you can't get rid of these things. Heaven forbid you get disabled. You can't even earn. You're on disability check from the government for the rest of your life. You have no extra money. Guess what? They're still not getting rid of your student loan debts. Almost everybody that applies to have student loan debt reduced is rejected. USA Today just ran an article, a few different articles over the past year on this. The most alarming one that they just published, 13% of divorce is because of college debt. Not overall debt. I'm talking about specifically student loan debt. So that doesn't even include credit card debt. Because finance is by far and away the number one thing that causes divorce. And I don't really believe that it's finance per se. But usually what it is it's the two people that got married did not have a clear understanding of each other's, I'm going to say, belief in money and what money is for and how money should be spent, and having an agreement that makes sense for both of them. And therefore, when one person has a different ideology towards money than another, that's going to cause stress in a relationship. But it's understanding and knowing each other around money that's very important. But where's that taught? Financial education in this country is absolute crap. That's part of the reason that I'm doing this podcast, is because we realize that most students and most people are not being set up to understand the capitalist system that we live in, to understand finance as it is. So the whole point of this is to help everybody. But again, we're going to deal with the biggest problem that we see right now, and that biggest problem is student loan debt. And I see this as a risk to our economy. Small businesses aren't being created. Students aren't buying houses. You can't be ahead in life when you're constantly dragged by this debt. I mean, it's emotionally exhausting as much as anything. And for students graduating with a lot of it, I empathize. And there are a lot of programs out there to try and help you reduce that debt. But at the end of the day, it's going to come down to one simple term. You're going to have to sacrifice more today to try and get out of that student loan debt, likely getting a second job and just putting all of the extra money at that debt. These things aren't complicated once you're in debt. They're the same for everybody in debt. Spend a lot less, but when you just graduated from college, it's difficult. I read a recent article in the Wall Street Journal about a kid who graduated from the University of Michigan. And he was actually savvy enough, I will say, that he lived at home and went to junior college for 2 years. Transferred to the University of Michigan, lived at home, but took out loans to pay tuition. Ended with roughly $40,000 of debt, which equates to a $500 a month student loan payment that he can't afford because his first job out of college, he's making $35,000. And the question that he has with his parents are, who's going to pay? And the parents had to sign up on the debt too. So the parents are the debtors as well. And that's not an easy question because in the student's mind, I did everything right. I graduated from the university that I was supposed to. I've gotten my first job, and literally what he's saying is all of my additional income is going to be taken away from me. The thing is that's not just for a year. That's typically for 20. 20 years you're going to repay that student loan debt. That's what most of the amortization schedules, aka your debt schedule of payments that you will pay. And in that time, you will pay as much in interest as you do in the loans that you borrowed. So this has a huge economic impact to our country. This has a huge personal impact to all the people getting student loans. So, and potentially a socioeconomic complete change of the system impact if everyone really believes socialism's the right idea. So here's the first thing that I'm going to do. First thing, let's just discuss how this system is not set up fairly. And I briefly went over the idea of this. But first off, everybody knows that the student loans are non-dischargeable in bankruptcy. That's pretty much common knowledge out there. But that's a distortion of the free market principles of capitalism. And if you're going to have a distortion on one side, which in theory is solving a problem. So if we look at this from the government perspective and we say, okay, what problem is this solving? If it was truly a free market society, then the only student loans available would be for students graduating with degrees where they could earn a lot of money. Now, ironically, the current student loan debt problem we got into because of a few doctors, I believe it was 9 out of 300 at the time, who did declare bankruptcy with their student loans. Now, doctors are probably on the bottom of the list, except for if you're in the bottom part of your doctoral class. If you're, we have an old joke that goes, what do you call the guy that graduates last in his class from medical school? It was a proctologist, because no one else wants that job. If you're in the bottom 1% of your school, you get what job they'll give you. But there will be doctors who don't make it. However, doctors generally are not the problem because they're going to have a long lifetime of high earnings. Now, they also have a huge student loan debt to pay off. But because they have the high earnings, they will at least have the earnings to be able to do it. So in a free market society, loans would only be available based on the ability of that person to repay them. And if they're dischargeable in bankruptcy, then if that person goes through hard times, those student loans would also go away. So that means there would be high risk. High risk would mean that they would probably charge higher interest rates for those loans, specifically based on the amount of the degree. Here's the other part of that, though. So let's say you wanted to go to school to be a teacher. And they said, well, the difference in what you're going to earn in a teacher is not going to be very much higher than if you didn't go to college at all. That, again, statistics according to the Pew Research Center. So we're only going to loan you a very small amount of money. Well, now that means that anyone who wants to be a teacher can't get a loan, which means we're going to have fewer teachers. So there's a logical process in here in which you say the solution so that everyone has access to student loans. The solution to that is that we make it so those loans aren't dischargeable in bankruptcy, i.e., those loans are guaranteed to be paid. And then they're also backed by the government. So from a bank's perspective, from an investor's perspective, if I just wanted to go loan somebody student loan money, and let's assume that I'm covered inside of the government system. So I'm loaning you money. You have to pay it back for me over the course of your life. You can't get rid of it in bankruptcy. And if you die before you repay that loan to me, then the government's going to repay me. So from an investment perspective, this is one of the best investments that you could possibly make. You can't get rid of it in bankruptcy, so it travels around with you for your lifetime. And if you die without repaying it, then the government repays it. That's a guarantee. So on the banking side now, we have a guarantee of repayment. That's pretty much unheard of. Government bonds are considered the one other guarantee right now. But government bonds pay 2%. Student loan debt can be much, much higher, 6 to 8% right now. And most of the loans are unsubsidized. Unsubsidized means that the government isn't paying the interest between the time when you're a freshman and you take out your first loan and you graduate. And again, financial education, we're not differentiating for all the students what this means. That if you take out student loans when you're a freshman, by the time you're a senior, those have grown by whatever that interest rate is, compounded over 4 years. That's a lot more money than you thought. Now you owe more than you thought, which is usually the case. And we're going to show you the real math. But let's get back to the system. So the government sets up the system to solve one problem of saying we want everyone to have access to financial education. That makes sense for the most part. But here's where the government failed all the students. They gave the banks the guarantee. Banks go, great, we'll loan money to students. 1.5 trillion of it now out to students. But here's where the government failed on that. First, failed in education. If we're going to give people loans, we should be educating them in the loan we're going to give them. We give them the least amount of information possible right now. And two, they don't have a foundation for what they're trying to understand to begin with. So now what we're required to do if I'm going to loan you money is I'm required to show you the amount that you're going to have to repay over 20 years. Again, we're giving this to an 18-year-old, a 19-year-old. Brain's not even fully developed yet. You're not allowed to buy alcohol, but you're allowed to sign up for a future of debt that cannot be discharged in bankruptcy that you will carry around for your entire life until you repay. That is a whole lot of requirements for the future to be placed on someone that's 18 years old. It's a whole lot of knowledge that we expect them to have at an early age when we know they don't. And also, when you take it into the context of what we're selling, what are we selling? What is a student buying? They are not getting money to buy a thing. You're going to college to potentially chase your dream, to go on your hero's journey, to make a better life for yourself and your family. And if everyone is telling you that this is going to be a better life, which they are, the grade school, the elementary school down the street from my house, has a banner out front of it that says, future college graduates studying here. So that's at the elementary school, which means that everywhere in our educational system, we're being told, as parents, students, everyone is being told the same thing. Everyone should go to college. First of all, that's not a true statement. We'll address that in a future podcast. We'll get into the details of that, of the real reward for it, and of the options that are available. But that's not a true statement to begin with, but that's what we're being told. right? So we're brainwashed. If 94% of parents believe that their kids are going to be future college graduates, and at every school along the way, everyone's being told, go to college, go to college, go to college. Now our self-worth as an individual is based on whether or not we're going to college. And that's not right, and nor it should be that way. So if we're going to give people that this is the direction, then we should certainly educate them in the finance of these decisions and the consequences of these decision making. For example, if you start college and take out debt and you don't finish, you're unlikely to make more money than someone who didn't start college to begin with, but now you have this huge debt burden that follows you around for forever. That's not good for anybody, and there's a lot of students in that position. Since the statistics that I've read recently are that 70% of high school graduates are enrolling in college, but only 40% of them are graduating. That means 30% of the students that are enrolling never graduate. That's an extremely high dropout rate. And how many of those dropouts have student loan debt? How many of those people really understood the financial impact to them of what they were signing up for as 18, 19, 20-year-olds? They're not concerned about the monetary value of it because they're chasing a dream. And they're doing what everyone told them to do. So I understand now if you're a student and you say, hey, I've got all this student loan debt, I can't afford to pay it off, and I just did what everyone told me I should do. But this is the first lesson. This is the first lesson of this podcast. The system is not set up for you. Stop listening to them. They don't have your best interest at heart. So let me go on to the next portion of where the government's failed students. And that is, there's no limit to the amount of student loan debts that they'll give to somebody. So again, in a free market system, the market would decide. The market would just put certain values on it based on what you could earn, and then also put in a personal risk. So if you go back and you listen to the first set of financial education podcasts, where we talk about what's your interest rate comprised of, and we talk about inflation, and we talk about your personal risk, and we talk about the asset class. In this case, the asset class is you. You're the individual. So what you're going to do when you graduate matters, and would matter a lot more in a free market. But let's say you did want to be a doctor. Well, maybe they say, okay, the average doctor's salary is $300,000 a year, and they therefore have $100,000 of disposable income they could spend on their student loans, and we want them repaid over 10 years, so the max we would ever give a doctor is $1 million. But really, that would be at the highest risk level, so maybe it's $500,000. And maybe if you want to be a teacher, they'll only give you $30,000. Maybe if you want to be an engineer, they'd cap it at $100,000. But this idea that there is absolutely zero cap on how much a student can take out. When I'm reading about people with a sociology degree with $200,000 of student loan debt, this is obviously a distorted market. This should not be allowed to happen. You should not be able to take out debt that you will not be able to repay based off of the job you're going to get after school. There should be a limit to it to protect students, because on the other hand, we've protected the banks. So the government's protected the banks from the students, but we haven't protected the students from the banks. The other way we haven't protected the students from the banks is what Elizabeth Warren's been out ranting and raving about, is that the banks aren't required to sell the student the lowest cost product. And this isn't the first time the banks have done this. Unless there is a government requirement that they give the students the best possible rate, they've done the same thing over and over and over. Whether it's related to housing or car loans, it doesn't matter. The banks will offer you what makes them the most money. And this is what I want everybody out there to realize. And we haven't even gotten to the institutions yet. But the people who are loaning you money are doing what's in their best interest, not yours. Now, all of that could be fixed with one simple rule. One simple rule that the government could institute, and that is make everyone talking to a student and their family about their college education and the amount of debt that they're going to take on, and the banks who are giving them the loans, all of those people, make them all required to be a fiduciary of that student and that family. Simple solution, and we're done. Everybody wants to rehash all of the student loan debt. But the solutions are very actually simple. If you believe that we need the loans to not be discharged in bankruptcy, even though the head of the Federal Reserve disagrees with that, and I agree with him, they should be. We should come up with criteria for what that is so that people understand it and it's clear. Instead, the answer pretty much across the board right now is not going to happen. Guaranteed by the banks. And the other reason the government's not going to loosen the restrictions right now is because, as I said earlier, if that loan's not paid back, the government has to pay it back. So if the government allows the rules to be changed, then they're the ones that have to pay. Now, at the end of the day, that's you and me, because we're the ones that are they're going to collect our taxes and raise our taxes to pay this back. And it takes away all personal responsibility, which is not part of how capitalism is supposed to work. The whole idea is personal responsibility. So we could fix this system very, very easily. Make everyone who deals with students and their parents a fiduciary. Cap the amount of student loans that any person can get based on the degree. And I'm not trying to tell you what that number is, but I've done the math. As I explained earlier, it's real easy to borrow enough money such that the benefit of college, as expected, goes away. Just use the research data and put a cap on it. I'm not saying what that number needs to be, but there should be a cap based off of what degree you're trying to go get, and how much future earnings you will have, and how much of your future earnings you should be giving back for tuition and interest to other people, and how much you should be able to retain. There should be a maximum on that. The other thing the government could do immediately is require that everyone, if they're a fiduciary, then they're going to have to give you the lowest rate available instead of the rate they'd like to charge you. They're going to have to give you the lowest fee structure available. And instead, what the banks right now say, what they've all said back to Elizabeth Warren, is that we didn't break the law. And they're not wrong about that either. They didn't. But all that is a failure of government to create fair laws when they're skewing the system to begin with. And the student wouldn't need to be protected by fair laws if the government didn't have a rule that you can't discharge those loans in bankruptcy. But since you can't, we have to have fairness on the other side. So this fixes the government's problem immediately. But the government's problem isn't the only problem in the system, right? Obviously, we need a financial education piece, and we have to determine what financial education we would give people before we allow them to take out student loans. And that should be across the board anyway. And I'm going to provide that education. Our basics education, that's already done. That's already up. If you're listening to this, you can go listen to that next, or hopefully you listen to it beforehand. And you get through the basics of what you need to know. And then we can get into specifics of student loan debt borrowing. But my message to everybody is you don't need to borrow. There are ways to do it. And there's a lot of things that make sense about doing it alternative ways that everyone needs to look at. So that student loan debt is now considered an option. Because this is the other piece that I keep reading. Harder and harder to avoid. Almost impossible to get out of college without student loan debt. Those things are not actually true. Those are things that they're selling you in the marketplace. They want you to believe that so you continue to take out student loans. But student loans are your option to take out. And I'm going to tell you the same thing I tell everyone when it comes to debt. The first way you stay out of debt is you don't sign up for debt. And we will belabor that point going forward. So, the system isn't set up for you. The government is not going to fix this. I can't remember the last time the government really fixed a real problem. And since they can't even figure out to keep themselves open right now, this is what these blogs and these podcasts are going to be about. The other side of this system that's not set up for students is tuition and university price increases across the board. University cost of education has gone up way, way faster than inflation. It's more like healthcare in terms of our cost. It just makes no sense anymore. Why do they keep raising tuition year after year after year? They're not hiring better professors. If you're going to a for-profit school, well, guess what? You're paying just for them to do advertising to you. And I'm going to say the last piece as a student where the system is not set up for you at all goes back to the same fiduciary rule. Every university that you go to talk to about going there, they are selling you. They have a bunch of used car salesmen lined up to say, look, we have this university to sell. So if you show up to the University of Colorado, it pretty much does not matter what degree you say you want to get. They're going to steer you towards something at the University of Colorado because that's all they can sell. And they want you. They got to hit their numbers. They need their enrollment numbers to match what their goals are so that they bring in enough revenue to keep their university open so they can keep hiring and spending however they like. They're not hiring more tenured professors that would help you get a better education. They're going to sell you on the idea that they're spending all of this extra money on amenities that you need and want and have to become a better person and feel like you have a better college environment. And when you show up on campus, they're going to give you the dog and pony show and tell you how wonderful it's going to be and how your dreams are going to come true there regardless of what it is. But they're not looking at your financial situation. They're not looking at you and your family and saying, what's the best decision for this family based on what you can afford and what you want to spend. They're selling you what they have to sell there. Just like if you go to buy a used car and you go to a used car lot. They're not trying to sell you something that's not on their lot. They're trying to sell you something they have right there because that's what they get paid on. And the people at these universities come to you and say, oh, we've developed this great financial aid package. Well, here's something you need to know. Student loan debt is not aid. It is debt. It means you will owe. That is not helping you, that's hurting you. This is like when you walk into a yoga studio and they say, hey, this week there's a retreat. 3 days with your favorite rock star teacher. And they say, oh, it's not a cost for you. It's an investment that you're going to make. This is a lie. This is where they've turned words around. It's not an investment. An investment is something that you buy that has a high likelihood of giving you money back and returning the original amount that you've included. You don't buy Apple stock thinking that it's going to go down. You're buying it on the idea that it will go up, and that stock gives you a right to that company's future cash flows. You don't have a right to any future anything when you pay for yoga. The additional value that they're selling you when you're signing up for college is that you will be able to earn more. Okay, but if you pay it all back to them in tuition and you pay it all back to the banks in terms of interest, then it is a value to you, or it is a value to them to get you to pay their tuition. They're telling you the value's for you, but who's for it really? And again, this goes back to what we talked about earlier. Caveat emptor. Students, parents, you need to be aware that the entire system is not set up for your benefit. You need to look at it that way, objectively. Even though we've all been brainwashed, obviously, 94% of parents believe their kids going to go to college. Only 70% do. Only 30% graduate. Problems across what we think is going to happen and what really happens in life. But what we're being sold is that these are investments. They're not if they don't pay off. If you give away all of your future expected earnings, but you have to live with the stress, then are you better off or worse off? I'd say you're worse off. If you say, hey, I went to college and I did what they say, but now I'm divorced because my wife got tired of trying to make ends meet with me having to pay off huge chunks of student loans all the time, or us fighting over where the money's going to come up with. 13% of divorce based on student loans? That's a crazy number. I don't know if the Student Loan Hero survey is really indicative of what's really going on out there. I know money is always listed as the number one reason for divorce. But student loan debts, I'm going to say first off, aren't entirely necessary. Second off, you have a lot of choices and options. And we're going to dive into all of this. I've been doing a lot of research on this because I believe that it is an important topic for us to address for economic reasons, for personal reasons for these students. So this hit home with a story. A friend of my mother-in-law's, and I've changed this story entirely to protect this family because I know it's a sensitive topic. And I get where they're coming from. This family's got a wonderful daughter. She's amazing with animals. She's worked at a veterinarian's office, and having worked there and understanding her love of animals, she came back to her parents and said, I think I'd like to be a veterinarian. Oh, that's great. It's a great thing to aspire to be. That is a fantastic hero's journey to undertake. To not just want to help yourself and your family, but to help animals and farmers and people with pets. And it's a great thing to be able to give back. So then we started discussing her financial story for education. And she went down and she looked at schools across the country and went and visited Colorado State University in Fort Collins. And of course, it's a beautiful place. Fort Collins is a lovely campus. It's very inviting environment. It's up against the foothills and the mountains on the Front Range in Colorado. The town of Fort Collins itself has a beautiful small downtown and a very vibrant community supported by students, agriculture, and retirees. Kind of a perfect blend for a college town. So the university sold her on itself. And they said, great, you want to be a veterinarian? We have a wonderful veterinarian program. First, you need an undergraduate degree, and then it's a 4-year program to graduate. And then after that, you'll go do an internship with a veterinarian before you could get licensed. So we're talking about 8 years of college plus a residency program. Well, of course, you can achieve your whole dream here, is what the university told her. Yeah, you'll have to pay out-of-state tuition, but it's just a little bit more. But don't you want to get started sooner because you're going to be in college for so long? So they provide them with the plan to come and spend the entire time in Fort Collins. Now, when you look at the amount of debt load after 8 years of college, and you look at the salary that this girl would have, an average salary is like $88,000, which is much better than the average high school graduate. It's about $35,000. But the amount of student loan debt she would have was going to be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Because not only is she paying tuition for room and board for 8 years, But those first 4 years, she's paying out-of-state tuition. That is not the best decision for this family, which does not have a lot of money, and even if it did, why waste it all on out-of-state tuition? The out-of-state tuition chunk alone was going to amount to almost $100,000 of debt. The total package for all 8 years was going to be more than $250,000 of debt. And I looked at those numbers, and understanding what this person wanted to do with their life, it brought me to tears. Because that $250,000 of student loan debt is going to require $500,000 to pay off, which is going to require she earn an extra $750,000 to pay taxes, to pay the tuition, and to pay the interest. But no one's showing her this math. The school's selling her on what's best for the school. It's best for the school if she spends 8 years there. They didn't discuss with her that, hey, you should move to Fort Collins. Find some roommates, get a job, take a gap year. That'll save you $100,000 off your student loan debts. Go to junior college for 2 years. Transfer, finish your 2 years at any undergraduate program. Doesn't even need to be in Fort Collins. You could go to a smaller school in one of the smaller towns in Colorado where cost of living is a whole lot less. Take that degree and transfer it. And then spend your 4 years that are required to do that specific program. But that's not the advice they're going to give her. The advice they're going to give her is what's best for them. Well, hey, I need tuition numbers up. I need my enrollment number. I got to hit my enrollment number as a salesperson so I get my bonus. That's what the salesperson's telling them, and they're giving them the exact pitch, exactly what they want to hear. Just like a used car salesman. I'm going to tell you why this car is going to fit your ass the best. And it's got up and down windows, exactly what you want. It's got remote control, start, exactly what you want. And it's also more expensive than what you wanted to spend. But it's right here. You could have it today. It's easy. You don't have to go everywhere else. You don't have to do all this extra work. All you have to do is show up here, sign the student and their parents up for a lifetime of debt. Because by the time she got done with that $250,000 of debt, she's going to have to earn an extra $750,000. Which means that even if she's earning $50,000 more than a high school graduate, she's going to have to work for 25 years to repay that. Now, average person gets to work 40 years because they get done with school at 24. But now she's got an extra 4 years. So her 40 years has already shrunk. For the average person working 40 years, now she's at 36. And 25 of those years are going to be working for nothing but paying tuition, taxes, and interest to a bank. 25 out of her 36 working years, assuming she doesn't take any time off for kids. Where is she going to get the investment to open up her own clinic? She's not, which means she's going to be working for somebody else, which means she's not going to be making that average. She's not going to get that extra $50,000 a year, which means she won't have as much to pay back student loan debt. That debt is going to follow her around for the rest of her life, and her family will be lucky to ever pay it off. She will not get to have her dream of opening up her own center, and instead will basically be working to pay Colorado State University and a bank for the rest of her life. That's a horrible, horrible outcome. And shame on the person who told that family that was a good idea and signed them up. Shame on you. But here's the thing. Here's the lesson as the individual. The system is not set up to help you. It is not set up to help you at the university level. It is not set up to help you at an education level of the finance of which you're taking out. It is not set up to help you with the repayment of your student loan debt. It is not set up to make school more affordable. None of the system that is set up right now benefits the student, with the exception of the idea that you can go get as much money as you want to get whatever kind of education you've decided you can get. But that's a trap. It's a trap you don't even know you're walking into. And they're selling you a dream, which is the worst kind of thing to sell if there's no constraints around it. And the universities are getting in more and more and more trouble over this nonsense. Law schools that were purporting, how much you could make afterwards, being sued by students who found out afterwards and after they got their degree that they're not making nearly as much money as they were promised. I just saw another university settle. I believe it was Temple, but I'm not positive. But another one of these universities just settled because they lied about how much their MBA students were making. And if you're discussing anything with a private institution, they have a profit motive. The whole reason to get you there is so that they can charge you more money. Tuition's higher at for-profit universities. Can't imagine why, except for that profit motive. And that's not to say that they are all bad because they are private. But private for-profit, usually not very good in terms of helping you, the student, because they're not designed there to help you, the student. That's not their underlying philosophy. The underlying philosophy is make money for shareholders, not help students the most. That's not the reason they exist. So the government's busted the system. There's easy ways to fix it. As I've said, make everyone who deals with students and parents a fiduciary. Require financial education before loans can get out. And maybe parents and students will make some better decisions if they had all of the information available to them. But I go back to that family story where there's a lot of cheaper options for the family. Because here's what's rarely asked when you're on campus. What can the family afford? Because affordability is not a problem because we can just get student loans to cover all the difference. But that's not aid, as I said. That's future indentured servitude, aka economic slavery, where you're now working for somebody else because you can't get rid of this debt regardless of what happens to you. So this system that we have right now is terrible. However, you have a personal choice not to deal with it. You have a personal choice to not sign up for the debt. You have personal choice to figure out ways around it. And hopefully you've come to this podcast looking for answers, and we're going to give some to you. I've got a series lined out in this that will go through pretty much everything you need to think about before you choose which college to go to. But the first thing that you need to know is that, the first thing you need to have before you come to me is you have to want to graduate with no student loan debt. It has to be a desire of yours. You have to understand what you're getting and what the value of that college education is, and you have to decide the amount you're willing to sacrifice to get it. There are ways to do it. And the more I've dove into all of this, the more I'm looking at the research and having been through it myself and figuring out ways to hack the system, they're out there. But as usual, they require you do a little more work. If you want to find the best deal on a used car, you don't go to one dealership, take what they tell you is the price, and buy it. You do your research. So we're going to ask you to do your research. We're going to ask you to come up with what you're really after. We're going to ask you to define what's that degree getting you. What are you buying? What are you paying for in that education? Because right now the universities can't even agree amongst themselves of what their purpose is. If the purpose of a university is just to provide you with a better education to enhance your life or a better education to enhance your earnings. Right now, that's a 50-50 split on what they think they're supposed to be doing. But you don't need to go to college to become a better person. You can do that in life. They don't have special books at a university that you can't get anywhere else. They have some really overpriced ones from professors, also another racket. But there are a lot of things that you need to think about before you just go sign up for $125,000 of a sticker price education at the University of Colorado or Colorado State. That is not worth the money to me. Whether your parents have it or not, even if your parents have it, if you could get it cheaper, then you could use that money as an investment tool for your longevity and your financial security going forward. There's no reason to just accept sticker price. There's no reason you can't get a deal. But if you want a deal, you've got to work to get a deal. So if you have a reason that you're going to college, and if you have the desire to graduate with no debt, then hang on and keep going through all these podcasts. We'll get you there. We'll give you some options that most of the people aren't thinking about. As I said, what I see out there is a bunch of people bandaging the wounded because there's a gun on the hill that keeps shooting every student who walks out in front of it. No one's talking about taking the gun off. No one wants to attack the gun on the hill. Everyone just accepted that's what it is. That's what it costs. It's increasingly difficult to get out without student loans. Yes and no. There's increasingly more help. But you have to be willing to go look at it. You have to be willing to do the work yourself. And you have to be willing to make the right decisions based on what's best for the long term of the family and not necessarily your instant gratification of tomorrow, i.e., I want to go with my friends to where they're going, even though it's really expensive. And if you're being sold at a for-profit institution, you need to really look at that objectively, because their job is to sell you. They're selling you a much more vivid dream than they're going to really give you. Because at the end of the day, college is not the end-all be-all of what you're going to end up doing. And in fact, most people, less than 30%, 10 years out of college, are doing something in the field of which they got their degree. So the direct correlation between your degree and your job, unless you're in a technical profession, is probably going to be pretty low. So you need to understand what you're buying. But most importantly, you need to understand that across the board, everything they are telling you, from being a child in an elementary school, everyone should go to college. Not true. Everyone has to have student loan debt in college. Not true. Everyone needs a college education. Not true. You need to know why you want it. And you need to know the system set up for you. Because you can go out there and look right now and see what the debt's causing people. Causing divorce. Causing unhappiness across the board. And tons of products trying to sell people how to fix themselves after they've walked into the quicksand. So we're going to try and help you not walk into that quicksand. If you're willing to do the work, if you're willing to take the steps, if you're willing to listen and you're willing to look at things objectively, we're going to help you. And we're going to start, just as we're starting this financial podcast with a major problem of education, we're going to start in the places where we can get the biggest bang for our buck. Episode 2 is going to be about out-of-state tuition and the ridiculousness that is. And if you're thinking about going out of state, then I've got a $200,000 a year job opportunity for you. And that'll be podcast number 2. But for now, this has been Keep Yours. I'm Dave Bradshaw. Thanks for listening. Catch you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Keep Yours podcast. If you like what you've heard, head on over to iTunes to subscribe and leave us a review. This will help us reach more listeners, grow the show, and keep putting out more episodes like this one. Check out show notes and more resources at www.keepyours.org. See you next week.